Hey guys, this is Lydia. Welcome back to the Weekly Web Activist. This is our second episode of the timeline titled Race, Politics, and Economics. So applications are still open for the Weekly Web Activist. Go to our link tree to apply or visit our Instagram and Twitter to learn more information. Here on the side, we have the application process for you all. This can also be found on our website, and so we look forward to reading your responses, and we would love to have you on our team. So make sure to check out the information that we have put out so far and look at our story. We have the descriptions of the specific executive positions that are available up on the story, including the head of communications, which would run our social media, the head of writing, which would run our website and blog and write our YouTube descriptions, community engagement, which would do Q&As and fundraisers, data analytics, which would do suggestions, and then of course content creation to help me run this channel. So please reach out to me if you have any questions, and enjoy the second episode of the timeline titled Race, Politics, and Economics. So the first post we have is performative activism versus genuine allyship. Performative activism is a form of activism used to increase one's own social capital without focusing on the cause. Examples of this are only recognizing or renouncing your privilege without doing anything else for the movement. Genuine allyship is a form of activism that does not direct attention to the activist, but rather seeks to support the cause that the activist stands for. For example, utilizing your white privilege to interrupt white supremacy or having constructive conversations to educate your friends are part of genuine allyship. And so you can also be a genuine ally by learning about the history of the land that you live on and reading, watching, and listening to BIPOC authors and filmmakers and artists to better educate yourself. Our next post is on apoliticism. Apoliticism is pretty much just not caring about the political situations of our government today. To be apoliticized is to be quite privileged because so many issues, including poverty, homelessness, insurance, social issues, and so many other things, including human rights, are all rooted in politics, and we need good politicians that you care about to help make a difference within our government. And so you have to realize that things do impact you, and your vote is your voice. So don't forget that if you're able to, please vote in the next election. So the next post is on the race and gender pay gap, which is essentially how women are paid, and specifically women of color and black women are paid compared to white men and men of color. And so essentially black women only make 61 cents on each dollar that a white man makes. So it would take them hundreds of years to accumulate the same wealth that a white man would working the same job. And why this is important is because the gap widens over time, and they are no longer able to build the generational wealth that is seen in other communities. And so some action items are that you should learn about the pay gap in your own community and try to support minorities and specifically women of color within their jobs and within their services. The next post is a rebuttal post for when people say black people should just work harder. A study from Indiana University shows that even when black people work just as hard as their white counterparts, they aren't rewarded in the same manner. And the concept of working hard is judged differently for black workers. They receive more scrutiny from their bosses than their white counterparts within their workplace, and they're considered lacking in skills even with average performance. They're also still more likely to be denied from mortgage loans than their white counterparts, which goes into building intergenerational wealth. And so it's important for black people to be paid fairly and to be respected within their workplaces. So the next post is on intersectional feminism, and intersectional feminism is the understanding of how overlapping identities impact the way that women experience oppression and discrimination. So, for example, when a white woman experiences discrimination, this is much different than discrimination from a woman of color. Women of color are often disproportionately disadvantaged, and so you should recognize and acknowledge your privilege and listen to those from other oppressed groups when it comes to speaking on intersectional feminism. So this post is why black on black crime is a dangerous myth. Number one, crime is not the result of blackness. Number two, the majority of black people murdered are killed by other black people, but it's misleading because the majority of white people are killed by other white people, yet white on white crime is not a thing. It's also being articulated by white capitalists as a reason to lock black people up, even though it's a misleading statistic. And This post has graphs that support this view and also shows that black people and white people are most likely to live in communities where they are the majority, and so in reality, crime is more directly linked to poverty than anything else. Black Americans are 2 times as likely to live in poverty as white Americans are due to gerrymandering and a whole bunch of other things. And also, not all black people are murderers. Black people who are murdered make up less than 1% of the entire US population. And so it's important to remember that arguments like black on black crime are derailing from the issue and are very dangerous, as they can paint a negative view that is misleading from black people. So please share this post, don't be silent, and support quality journalism that helps us recognize this issue. So the next post we have is actually from an Asian and immigrant perspective on Black Lives Matter, and it's a post to help you begin the conversation of Black Lives Matter with your parents if you do come from that ethnic background. And so this post rebuts black on black crime, like the post that I mentioned earlier about how it really goes back to poverty and the social injustices that black people have faced versus the actual crime aspect. And so it also goes against the model minority stereotype and myth, and it explains how Asian Americans, while they have faced a lot of discrimination in this country, they haven't faced as much discrimination as African Americans and have had different perspectives in this country from African Americans, and so it affects how society sees them and how they're able to move in society. It also addresses the looting of the protest and BLM protesters looting or burning buildings, and it explains how you should care more about human lives than property, and that the looting shouldn't be the main focus in your response to BLM protests. It also explains how All Lives Matter is actually distracting and why Black Lives Matter is such an important movement and such an important statement now. And like I said earlier, it talks about how black people have faced more discrimination and how Asian Americans were able to assimilate into the United States, but black Americans have always been oppressed by the United States. And then it of course goes over the bad apples theory with cops, and it destructs that to show you how the structure and position of cops is the actual problem. And then it just says to keep being vigilant and keep showing your parents that you're serious about this issue. So the next post is actually on adultification, and adultification refers to the tendency adults have to perceive black children as older than they are, and so rather than attributing the child's behavior to their youth, people tend to assume that black children's actions are intentionally malicious. And so this becomes a problem when dealing with authority figures because they usually face harsher punishment as a result. They make up 16% of the student body, but 39% of school suspensions. School discipline and juvenile detention are also closely connected, and so adultification of black students fuels the student to prison pipeline. So the Weekly Web activist suggestion is to practice seeing black kids as they are, just black kids, not any more grown or dangerous than any other demographic. So this next post is on what poverty porn is, and it's programs and articles about poverty that do not address the issues behind poverty but present it as a form of entertainment. And so entertaining can really mean a motive or something that brings emotion without scrutinizing why this poverty is happening. And so a lot of nonprofit organizations use this to try to get donations. It's also just like a charity thing in which it fuels the white savior movement, and it doesn't address like the great accomplishments or contributions or things that aren't part of poverty within those areas, specifically within Africa in this post. And so you should demand advertisers and photographers portray people with dignity and respect, and so that we can end and help end poverty porn. So this next post is literally just a tweet from Twitter that I found that I really liked, and it says that people don't see classism as a legitimate form of violence because they still believe being poor is indicative of a person's character rather than it being of systematic oppression, rather that poverty is traumatic, and that in order for rich people to thrive, a whole lot more barely survive. So this next post is really on billionaires, and it just breaks down the concept of $1 billion and why that is so much money. And so it explains that if you're making $5,000 a day from the time of Christopher Columbus to now, you still wouldn't be a billionaire. And so you'd have to work almost 3 times the salary of President K just to come up with a $5,000 a day salary, and you still wouldn't be a billionaire. Except Jeff Bezos accumulates that in less than a week. You know, he made thousands of dollars just within the time span of reading this. And so usually billionaires don't earn their wealth. A lot of it is just inherited wealth. And Jeff Bezos actually exploits workers to help build his billion and doesn't pay any taxes. And so this is important because we need to vote in politicians that don't give tax cuts to the rich. And so if you can't vote, don't support Amazon and Jeff Bezos or other services that fund billionaires that don't pay taxes. This next post is all about mail-in voting, and it pretty much explains all of the myths and fake lies behind it. Right now, Trump is strongly opposing efforts to convert everyone to mail-in voting, yet he voted by mail, and so many of his own administration members have voted by mail. And so voting by mail is supposed to help out all of the people that Republicans care about in their party, except Republicans and mail-in states like Utah and Colorado have had a lot of success prior to Trump and mail-in voting, and yet he's opposing it. It doesn't make any sense, right? One group that benefits from absentee ballots is senior citizens that often skew the GOP, and there's no evidence that mail ballots increase fraud. Voter suppression is already rampant across this country, yet we see these things happen in every election without mail-in voting. Trump floated delaying the election using mail-in voting, except you have to understand that mail-in voting is not just about Trump, but it's a safe way to protect your democracy, and that if you can, you should definitely visit vote.org and request a ballot. This next post just pretty much goes over how to fill out the ballot specifically, and it gives you a step-by-step process, with the last step, of course, being sealing and signing and mailing your ballot. And you can take another look at that if you need any help. And so this post is about the 2016 election results and how we thought they looked versus how they actually looked, with so many eligible people to vote not voting. And so make sure that you do vote and that you are part of either side. And so this last post is an essay on why Instagram infographics are not revolutionary. And so you may think like, hey Lydia, you're doing the timeline, like how could you post a post like this or share a post like this? And I would just say the timeline is supposed to serve as a conversation piece. It's supposed to serve as the beginning of the conversation, but there's so much more to do in terms of activism, and we have to make sure that we don't fall into the mistake of just resharing Instagram posts, not taking any more movement, and sort of closing the conversation in to our own social media bubbles. We need to go out and interact with people from different parties from us, interact with people that are involved in the politics and have expertise on the particular fields that we're posting about, and make sure that we truly involve ourselves in our community, not just in our online community, but also have that translate into our physical community and translate into our relationships with other people. And so here in the post, they use the example of the Hong Kong situation and all of the protests and everything that's going on in Hong Kong. And while you may have seen a lot of infographics about that, and that's great, the infographics are using Western-leaning imperialist media, because that is essentially all we see in our social media bubble of the United States. And so you have to really do your own research and find different perspectives from global issues and from global leaders who are involved in those issues to really make informed posts and informed decisions. I want to thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. Look out for next week's activist feature series with the organization Penny for Many, and come hang out with us on Instagram and Twitter at ActivistWeb. We are extremely active, so please share any posts that you have that may be able to be featured in our next timeline video, and make sure that you keep up with everything happening within the Weekly Web Activists, whether it's fundraisers, applications, or so many other other things that we're involved in. And so come visit us on those social medias, and make sure to tune in next week for our activist feature series with Penny for Minnie. Thank you for watching.